And we welcome you to Vertical Pursuit, the podcast that is also on video. I want to thank you all for listening and watching. We are on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and also on the Vertical Pursuit app. If you don't have that, download it. And also go to the website, verticalpursuit.org. And there's a book on there as well on the app and ways to learn more about what we are doing, why we are doing it. And I know you wrote the book, Mike Tatlock, Mike Barrett with you as well, talking about issues that not just pertain to men, but we are kind of unapologetically geared toward men because we feel this is a big thing missing for men these days.
Yeah. Well, when we put that book together even, and it's going to lead into what we're going to talk about today, there's like 25 topics that we talk about, and they're broken into 3 segments. The first part of that book talks about your core. Every athlete knows that. You got to work your core. You know, who do I see myself as, and insecurities and lies that I believe about myself. And then the second kind of section of the book is about how do you thrive? What are the best practices of life? We all know that we're creatures of habit, and do I have the right habits that lead to the right things I want in my life? But the last part of the book talks about the word advance. And when I think of advance, I think like a military and even a sports word. You know, you think on a football field, advancing yardage down, advance the ball down the field. And you think on a military campaign, am I advancing, taking ground back? And so in that section, we talk about this big word called legacy. And I know that's been a really very personal part of your life recently. And I know when we talk about legacy, sometimes we talk about legacy, you get dudes that are like in your 70s going, I want to talk about legacy, right? And like a 20-year-old guy's like, I'm not even thinking legacy. I'm thinking like, I want to live the best life today, right? But actually, legacy should be something we talk about at every phase of manhood, whether you are even in your late teens, going into young adult, to especially even when you're midlife. Because why midlife is so important is because you've lived enough life to evaluate your life, but you're not at the end of your life to go, gosh, man, I wish I would have done way more. So, but when we talk about legacy, this kind of brings out a real personal part of a recent part of your life.
Yeah. And, well, and also to piggyback on what you just said about midlife, it also gives you time to have rebounded from missteps or from massive challenges. And then that adds to your legacy because, and I look at younger guys, it's not like you can't have a legacy then, but sometimes your book of knowledge or your book of experiences or your resume is not to the point where you have maybe a lot of stuff that you have overcome because you just haven't been around long enough. So I think it is interesting. But yes, in terms of legacy, you know, and I just got a text a minute ago from a friend whose dad just passed, like just now. Knew it was coming, still hard, and just trying to encourage. And it's strange, and I know it's the age I'm at now. But, you know, a year and a half ago, my dad passed. And then just very recently, my father-in-law passed. And so we went down to Arizona for the service. And I had a role in that and spoke for a bit and then had speakers behind me. And I'm sitting there listening to this and thinking that, you know, people need to hear it. And I thought I'm always thinking about topics for this, but really topics just for life. But what I kept hearing was, everybody brought it back to legacy. Everybody talked about all of the people he impacted, all of the moments that he was intentional and available with his time, and looked for opportunities to build his legacy. Not just and not for himself, not selfishly at all, because we talk about, and you used a line in a recent sermon that you were giving about worshiping at the idol of self, which we're going to do a whole episode on, probably multi-part series on, because you talk about the things that are eating society alive today. It's worshiping at the idol of self, which our kids are encouraged to do. But what I heard here talking about Denny, my father-in-law, was just these, and my dad too. So, I mean, this was just more recent, but the lives that they impacted and bettered simply by being available. And so then you look at your own life, your own walk. And you obviously, as a pastor, have this opportunity more than most because you have a platform that gives you the opportunity to build a legacy. And even I think, and I was thinking this watching you preach last Sunday in this beautiful building of a church, and I think back at the other buildings that our church has rented, and then you're in a school, and that's a legacy, man.
Yeah.
It is. It's your legacy.
Yeah.
And it just kind of hit me for some reason. In the middle of your sermon last week, I looked around and thought, man, it's all part of your legacy. But it's a valuable, not just a valuable legacy, but the process of legacy, I think, is very, very valuable.
You just hit something big time. Like that right there is the process of legacy. And you talk about Danny, because you texted me last week when you guys were down at the service, and you're like, "Oh my goodness, the place is packed. There's people outside, the overflow." And you look at his life, and just to honor him, because I think it'd be cool to honor him. He's your father-in-law, Shelly's dad, and I've had many, many opportunities to be hugged by him, encouraged by him. Every time he was in town, I'm like, "Where's Danny? I want to hang out with him." And not that anybody's perfect, and I think that's part of this whole thing. Authentic. And the process of allowing yourself to live your life for other people. Denny lived his life for other people.
Yeah.
And I think why we miss out on legacy is not what I have. It's not about me. At the end of life, it's not like what I've achieved, my awards, my accolades, is what I've done to leave an impact for others. So, because when I look at that, I go, the people that showed up at Denny's memorial service was the trophy of his life. And legacy is about people, not about ourselves, right?
Correct.
And I think
we get legacy and resume mixed up.
Exactly. But I think of that, and I know it hit you, and it even hit me again. And when I'm, 10 years from now, it doesn't have to be at the end of my life, in my 80s or something like that. 10 years from now, if I look back and go, what have I done the last 10 years of my life? What have I done the last 5 years of my life? Am I making anybody else's life better? My kids, my wife, those I work with, friends I have, people that God's called me somehow to be intersected with their life. Can I look back and go, have I built something around me? Like basically, am I building my altar to myself? That's not a legacy. That's an idol. But legacies is about the trophies is other people's lives.
And so then fighting off the urge to make it about yourself or to make it, you be you, dog.
Yeah, right.
That's what all you hear today.
Yeah.
And and our kids are preached that.
Yeah.
On social media it's just you go just do whatever. It's not what it's about. Right. And sorry to burn that down, but that's not.
Yeah.
And young people, if you listen or watch, this is not about you. It's just not.
No, it's not.
And I hate when I hear that, but we're drawn to that. So I guess as fathers, and I think that in so many troubles today in this world are the result of a lack of fathers and a lack of attentive fathers.
Yep.
And so when you talk about what's the most valuable legacy that you can give or the most valuable legacy you can leave, it isn't in your money and how much you made and how whatever else, all your accomplishments that you talked about, your idols, your trophies. It's about those little trophies that you have that you can leave that legacy to them. That, I think, sitting at his service and watching the job he did as a father to not only his own kids, but I mean, taking in, in this town in Arizona, there's this pizza place.
This is such a cool story.
It is. There's a pizza place and it's a town of 15,000. And you know how sometimes those places are. That's the place to be.
Yeah.
Lunchtime, all the kids will go there. Friday night football game, Saturday. Well, he lived at this pizza place because he knew that's where the kids were.
Right.
And so many kids who didn't have maybe the ideal family life, he went to be a father to, not to try and replace their father, but just try to give some guidance to. And so what I was moved by was all of his friends talking about his legacy, how he impacted their life. It was later on and hearing the emails and the stories from kids and even the guy who owned this pizza place. I don't know if it didn't matter. I don't know if he's a believer or not. He took me aside and was crying and explaining how much time he spent at this pizza place.
Yeah.
Literally walking table to table and learning and knowing these kids and being intentional and being mostly available.
Yeah.
but as a father to not only his kids, but to those kids, that blew me away, because that is a legacy I want to have.
Yeah. Well, and I know enough of Denny's story that at one point he was about midlife, I think it was, when they moved down there, and and it took a massive step of faith to go, I'm going to commit my life to investing, mentoring, pouring into other people, and not pursue a big career with a big paycheck.
Because he lost that.
He lost
in
all of it.
86
Exactly.
in that real estate crash. Is where he went, okay, time to go start a ministry.
Yep.
So I'm moving to this little town. I'm going to do it.
Yeah. And trusted God for income in miraculous ways.
Yes.
But what was crazy was he's like, I'm going to give up the pursuit of that wealth. And because you get to the end of your life, and the Bible says there's only two things that exist for eternity: souls and the Word of God. You can't take your treasure with you. Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to invest in anything, what's eternal is people too. Their souls, the impact I have on them. So he puts aside the pursuit and chasing after wealth, which you can't take that with you, to I'm going to change that. What's more valuable is people showing up at a pizza shop, buying some kids some pizza. And they're kind of going, what, why, but he cared, and he was present with it though. I just love those stories. It inspires me.
And even like, there's a family down there that we have known for years that we always go to the house for dinner. And this has been for 20 years that we've gone down there. And I've always known this guy and his family. And I always just assumed that he and Denny had known each other forever and always been godly men and walking the right. So I'm out by this guy as he's cooking ribs on the barbecue, and we're just talking. And come to find out, he had a flat tire years ago. Denny pulls over to help, which is no surprise. That's what he always did. While he's changing the tire, he starts asking him questions about his marriage, about his life. Doesn't even know the guy. He said it took him back so much that they met again later on. And then again later on, Denny led this guy to the Lord. I didn't know that. I mean, I just always assumed, because this guy is a very godly man, just works in the school system down there. But that one blew me away, because I'm like, how did I not know that? As much as I've known both of them, as many times as I've been down there, I missed this story. But I think that hit it back to me, along with the kids. Yeah. But just about how you do that. And not everybody's good at that. Not everybody can do that. But to see how he took normal everyday life situations, and he didn't hit somebody over the head with the Bible and judge them, and all these things that we've heard in the past, and the things that normally make people turn away from Christians on, or street revivalists. Not that, hey, do your thing, but it's the intentional availability that he would take to guys like that to start the conversation, to get him to at least start inspecting himself, maybe internally after he leaves, right, and then see where it goes from there. And that planting seeds that we always talk about, that's what that is.
That's exactly what it is. And you keep saying it was intentionally present in those moments. It's interesting too, because you had this moment, they always say you get to the end of your life and you look back, and you go to somebody's memorial service, and those are the moments you see where legacy is measured. Mm-hmm. And how many of us want to get there, and which we won't be, but we're in that context of, in our death, what have we left behind, and what have we paid forward? That's legacy. It's leaving behind something, but it's paying forward. That's momentum in somebody else's life that carries on way beyond your life. And I talk about this with Blazer guys in chapel. And these are all young dudes. I mean, these are 18, 19, 20, 24-year-olds. And we talk about not living a life of regret. It's interesting. The word regret, in its origin, it means this. It's the same word for grieving. So what happens is we all grieve. Grieve means I wake up one day and I lost something. That's what grieve means. Regret is similar, that you wake up one day and you feel this sense of loss, that my life didn't matter. And I'm sad about that. So legacy prevents regret. It prevents, it's the antidote to waking up someday going, I chased everything and I chased the wrong. And these pro athletes, they're chasing all the things, the paycheck, the endorsements, the shoe contract, the championships. It's like, okay, that's fun. But then one day you're going to wake up and you're like, gosh, man, I still feel this loss because I didn't chase after, I didn't invest my life in the right things.
And we've talked about this before, but there's a lot of people too who, and we mentioned this a few episodes ago about the suicide rates among middle-aged men who maybe get to that point, as you talked about, what have I been doing all this for? And where am I at? And who have I really helped? And I know it's busy. I know life's busy. And I know you have, your 50, 60 hour a week job. And then, as I've mentioned before, if you have kids, then it's events and sports, and then the weekend's packed, and then something breaks and you're fixing that in a room by yourself all weekend long, which we've both done. But it's how then does somebody at middle age, 40s, 50s, whatever, even beyond, if they are waking up discouraged and they are beating themselves up, which we'll get into a whole nother thing on believing those lies and the self-hate and not forgiving yourself if you haven't been a great father or even to the father that you think of the standard that you would think, how to get over that. But in terms of guys listening now who are going, now they're starting, which I hope they're doing, examining their legacy or their potential legacy, saying, okay, it's okay, but what are some steps then that you can tell somebody how to right that ship, or at least get because there's always time. I mean, everybody has, and we've had people on this, who've really had issues, and we have another good friend who had a huge life setback, that he did himself, but then his legacy in the last few years has tripled what it was before. So I guess to get back to my question, what are some things guys can then do to, number one, examine legacy, measure it, and I don't say measure it against somebody else, because I know we're not supposed to do that, but put it in the right direction, fix it.
It's a great question. I think no matter what stage of life you're at, and especially, midlife, you're in your 30s and 40s, 50s, you have enough of your life to kind of evaluate. And I think that's okay to do that. And part of evaluating your life is realizing, what have I been living for? What have I not been living for? The first thing that everybody has to do is stop. We are so fast paced, and we're so on the treadmill of what the world says is success. And we run around. Before you know it, a month went by where we were busy. And now that month, I tell people all this time, don't let seasons become norms. There are seasons of busyness, and we all give ourselves grace on that. We look at our kids and say, oh, it's a busy season. 6 months, 8 months, 6 years, it's not a season anymore. It's now, that's the norm. You've been absent. You've not been present, And so I think the first thing people have to do is just stop where you're at, whatever season of life, whatever age you're at. Stop, slow down, take a breath right now, and then just kind of go, what's important to me? And you think of legacy, we're going to talk about fathers here, because we can talk about legacy in a lot of other ways, but I think as we talk about particularly fathers, we need that so desperately right now. And we'll talk about that in a second, but you got to stop and go, what's important to me? And I've talked with a lot of men who are like, but Mike, I'm a grandfather now. I lost that I know it's never too late. It's never too late. You may have to make up for some things. You may have to be extremely humble and come back and admit that, hey, I could have been more present. I could have done this. That's okay. Don't let regret rob you of the future that you could still have. And that's if you beat yourself up and you go, wow, that's it, I'm always just going to live this way. No. Like, you might have 5 years left of your life. Make the most of that 5 years. You might have 20 years. Make the most of that. If your kid is outgrown the house and they're out doing their thing, you can still come back to them and say, I want to rebuild some things. I want to replace some things. So I think that's my first kind of place to start.
Well, and that's good. And as we talk about, we try to give people tools. Half the time I walk away with a whole bunch more tools, because I mean, the hard part there for me is, am I a good dad? Yes. Have I been a tremendous father? I don't know. I beat myself up a lot because for my kids, the first 13 years of their life, 12, I was on the road all the time, living out of a hotel room, working the NBA beat. And I'll never do that again in terms of that kind of travel and being away from the kids. But what I have said a lot of times is, and what I've thought, I screwed it up. It's too late. What my wife has always said is, it's never too late. And she said what you just said a lot. That's why I laughed, because that's what I hear, what I need to hear. Because honestly, I hate that feeling. And then I look at my kids are in high school, and I'm like, and I'm sitting here panicking, thinking, well, I only have a few years left. Well, it's not really true, but I do feel that way. And I feel that I feel that shame and that guilt that eats you alive. And I know a lot of guys can relate to that. But I like the message of never too late. And again, we have some friends who, even in those 60s, 70s, have made a tremendous impact on their own legacy by choosing to take steps to remedy maybe what's eating them alive or what's making them not the father they would like to be.
Well, and I think the other thing too on that is we look at, first of all, you're a great dad because you care. If a dad's not asking themselves the questions, and I remember when you were on the road, and sometimes we'd connect on home games and hang out, and you'd call me or we'd text when you were on the road. You were always thinking of your kids. You're always thinking of Shelly. You're always thinking of your family, and I think they know that, even if you can't be there because your job demand and things like that, but they know that. And a lot of times for us in ministry, as pastors, what our challenge is that if we're not careful and we don't set boundaries, because the tug and the pull of ministry is always like a first responder. You're always responding. What happens is your kids grow up in the church, and what they interpret was dad always had more time for them. Did he have more time for me? And the sad part is, if you do that because you work for Nike, they regret and resent Nike. If as a pastor you do that, they resent God and they resent church. So there is a high, what we call as for pastors, there's a high risk in our job. When it comes to like family dynamics, and being present is so important. I was telling somebody the other day, and I tell our staff this, I honestly tell our staff this, you got to be present. Number one thing, being an intentional father, you have to be present. You've got to figure that out. Sometimes that means you may have to change a job. You may have to take a paycheck. You have to figure out some hard stuff. If it's pulling you away that much, and that's keeping you from being present. But here's the thing, a lot of dads can be home, but they're not present.
Yeah.
You can be home. You can get home at 5 o'clock. You work at 9 to 5, you're home. You're still not present. Being present means you are fully present. I think that's the place where intentional fathering, you got to be fully present. You're paying attention, put the phones down.
See, that's, I was going to say, as you're saying that, I know I worked in a job, with whereas media and there is no 9 to 5. And my wife used to joke about that. She knew that job was not 9 to 5. There's always stuff happening. And now with social media, and if you have any kind of a social media presence, then you've got to feed that. So I'd find myself, and still I'm better now, but sitting at dinner, having the phone in and then getting mad at the kids for doing the same thing. And they're just modeling me.
Right.
Gosh, that's terrible. But and then running to my computer to send 4 emails that I got to send. I heard it. I wonder what those are.
Right.
Man, I've been guilty of that.
Oh yeah.
But the present thing, and I think that's where I beat myself up the most when I realize or catch myself. And when my kids were littler, this happened more, where I'm going to take care of something which really doesn't need to be taken care of. It's me chasing something.
Yeah.
And I can hear them having the time of their life, either outside on a trampoline or whatever it is. But the way and it's just, this is probably just me. I know it, and I know I'm going to kill myself for it later inside. And then that's my motivation. That shouldn't be my motivation, though.
Right. No, totally. And you do a great job of, I've watched you as a dad. I know your kids.
This has turned into I'm not healthy. Fix me.
None of us are perfect.
I know.
That's for sure. And I've had so many moments in my life where I'm constantly doing that evaluation, like, oh my goodness, like I've been gone too far this month, or I've been too busy, or I'm not present. I've been checking my phone too much. I've been responding. We all do that. Myself, everybody does that. I think it's when we stop evaluating ourselves that we run the danger of becoming the distant father, the neglecting father, and I think the other thing too is like when you look at being an intentional father, a couple other things that I've learned from others and try to put into practice is being present, fully present. I think it's also being aware of each of our kids' uniqueness. Every kid's different. And I think that what we have to be careful as fathers is we try to force our kids to be like us instead of being aware of who they are and helping them discover that and who God made them uniquely to be. And we certainly want to leave our imprint on them. We want them to join us, and we model things in our life, like, the hobbies that we have or things that we have. That's all fun. But I think like it's helping them discover who God made them to be, and being humble enough as a dad to say, man, I bring some tools that they have, that they need from me, but am I humble enough to find the tools they might need? Like, for instance, if my son wants to start playing the guitar, I have no musical ability whatsoever, like zero. I can teach my kids sports. I can teach them outdoor stuff. I have zero ability. But if my kid wants to pick up a guitar and learn, I need to go find some. So like I'm becoming more aware, and I'm also being aware of my own weaknesses. I'm also aware of what I'm shortfalls are. And I think so awareness is a big part of being an intentional dad, and then helping get, like, being humble enough to ask for others to come in and help offset that and help your child get what they need maybe from somebody else.
Since you are a pastor and you constantly have people coming to you and asking advice or asking for help in situations, what is maybe the biggest cry from fathers when they're trying to be intentional fathers, where they feel they're falling short, and then what's your advice in that?
This is the biggest one. If I could say anything, if there's anybody that's out there listening to this about you growing up in not a good home, you didn't have a good father figure. I mean, the statistics right now.
They're terrible.
The statistics, and I'm going to get controversial for a second.
Please.
So, I mean, there's a lot of really tragic shootings that are happening recently, and these are horrible. I think they're demonic. And I know there's a lot of focus on people have solutions in mind, but the solution I'm not hearing enough about is the role and the impact of what happens in a home without a healthy relationship with a father. Now, there's no guarantee. I'm not saying that, hey, if you grew up in a home without a healthy father, you're going to do something like that. I would never say that. But if you look at the statistics behind even like gun violence, you look at suicides, you look at even children in school, their performance, the dropouts, the ones that struggle, you look at incarcerations in prison. I mean, you kind of sit back and you go, wait a minute, there's a common element in this. And then you look in a society that just beats down dads. They portray men as the Homer Simpsons, and these guys are goofballs. And so society doesn't even emphasize the importance of having a good, we don't even respect, we don't even respect fathers anymore. No. Society says fathers are goofballs, irresponsible. And so that's the world we live in. And so there's a passage in the Bible that I think is one of the most epic passages that speaks to this. Jesus, at the very beginning of his ministry, like this is before he did any miracle, Jesus gets baptized, and it says that right there in that moment, the heavens open up, and his heavenly Father speaks out. So here's Jesus with a crowd of people. He's getting baptized, and from heaven, the heavenly Father says, "This is my Son. I am well pleased in him." And the heavenly Father just speaks his approval, his love, his blessing. And I really believe that was one for us as the audience to go, wow, Jesus had a great relationship with his Father. But it showed to us, I think Jesus needed it. I think Jesus needed to hear that because he's then going to go through his life and he's going to be tested as a man. There's going to be things thrown in his face. And Jesus was tested. The Bible tells us he was tested every way we are tested. I think Jesus was tested in his identity. Who am I? What am I like? And when we have a curse or we have the absence of a blessing of a father. So if I grew up in a home and there's no father figure, and it doesn't have to be my biological father, it could be a stepfather, it could be an uncle, a father figure. If you don't have that father that's speaking over you words of blessing, you have what it takes. I believe in you. I love you. I'm for you. When that's missing, they actually call it the father wound. They actually call it that. And it causes men deep inside to question themselves, to be insecure, to be irrational. And then we seek it out in unhealthy ways. We try to find that approval, and it doesn't lead to good things. And so men are in a quest. Men hunger, they thirst, they have that desire. They need that male approval to say, you do have what it takes. I believe in you. And so I say that because the Bible says with our mouths, we speak a blessing or a curse. Mm-hmm. So as fathers, when we have kids, man, I tell dads all the time, don't speak curses over your kids because that shapes their identity. And if you have, ask for forgiveness. You can always, you can repair those things. It's not too late. But speak words of blessing because every daughter, every son needs to hear that father say, I believe in you. I love you. I'm proud of you. Yeah. I'm for you.
I'm still waiting to hear what was controversial about what you're.
Well, what I was going to say was controversial
because I was waiting. I was all fired up, and then
well,
I'm like, that's just common
I know
sense.
right now as we talk about because currently we're talking about, and I know the statistics behind gun violence, and I'll just say that when you look at gun violence and you look at fatalities, The majority, 55% of yearly fatalities with guns is suicide. Mm-hmm. And the majority of the rest of those is of domestic violence. So what it says is we have unhealthy families, we have broken homes in our society, and nobody wants to have conversations around broken homes. And one of the reasons there's broken homes is because we don't have healthy fatherly role models. You know, as a Blazer chaplain, so this is straight up, I talked to the guys on the team, coaches and players, and I asked them, in your communities, what would you have, if you could have any dream wish that would help impact and change your communities, what do you need? You know what I hear? Consistently, male role models, male mentors, whether it's a coach, a big brother, an uncle figure, like whatever that is. And it just all comes back to this conversation. I think we need healthy father figures. Father figures that are healthy will change homes, and it will change society, it will change culture. That's why I'm passionate about this conversation. This is where I think it's the deeper issue, and we need to go there.
And that's the very thing society is mocking and ridiculing.
Yes.
Which is crazy to me.
Isn't that?
And then it reminds me of another story. A friend of ours told us just the other night that going into a prison, if I have this story correct, they brought in cards, Mother's Day cards on Mother's Day, and brought in a box of cards for Mother's Day. Every one of them went. Yeah. Everyone was taken, signed, sent out. Did the same thing for Father's Day, a box of Father's Day cards. Not one card was taken, filled out, or sent for those imprisoned. And that's not always the case.
No.
But I think it's pretty obvious.
Well, the stats support that narrative. Right. And you had the breakdown of that. And so again, we see society falling apart right now. And I think it's crumbling because we have families that are being fractured, and we have a society that's promoting value systems that erodes families. And you see it in all over the place, and it can be controversial, but you see things that are being promoted in schools. And that's breaking down family units. I think there's some political agendas right now that are anti-nuclear family, anti-building up the family. And you're just like, society is tearing down what the solution is to this. And that's the battle that we're in right now. So my word to every father that's listening here is, you may have grown up in a home where there wasn't that, and you long for that. You know, my dad passed away at 22. I'm so grateful that I have had a father in my life that was a great father. He always affirmed me, believed in me. When I went to his funeral, I saw so many men and women. His legacy was global. To this day, 20-some years later, I still get emails and texts, your dad impacted my life. And I'm like, yeah, because I benefited from that. And I never felt they were the priority. I always felt that he was always present with me. He was always affirming with me. I didn't feel like I was the neglected kid from that. But then he passed away. And some guys that are listening right now going, I don't know I'll ever have that. It wasn't there, and then I'll never have that. He's gone. Well, years later, I had another father figure who was older than me that had started pouring in my life, invested in me, was mentoring me. He died tragically, was shot at his door at his house. And I went to his funeral because I always thought I was the one that he always spent all the time with. Then I go to his funeral, and every guy that was there was thousands of men at his funeral. And I was like, I didn't know that. They all said, we all felt like his son. Somehow he was able to make everybody else feel like his son. And I went, man, I want that kind of legacy.
And that's interesting you say that, because at my father-in-law's service a couple weeks ago, we heard a lot of people tell that story of my wife and her brother. People said, well, how did you guys feel having to share your father with so many others? And they're both like, we didn't know.
Yeah.
We never noticed that.
Yeah.
And because I think he was talented enough and blessed enough to be able to strike a balance, to be able to not, despite the fact that he was pouring so much into so many, his own kids didn't feel like they weren't getting enough of him at home. Yeah. So I think that's great. And I think putting myself in the shoes of men who are hearing this, they're probably first thing's going to say, how am I going to find time to do all this? Mm-hmm. It's one more thing on my list. Yeah. But in terms of legacy, it's by far the most important thing on your list. It is,
absolutely. And I just think that's the word of encouragement. And I wouldn't say to guys that you didn't have that father figure, there is still the opportunity that God can bring other men in your life. And I tell guys this, like, get involved in church.
Yeah.
Show up at men's events. I look at our church specifically. We got guys that are 60, 70 and getting into 80 years of age. They got more time on their hand. They're actually looking to find some guys that are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s so they can do that. And a lot of those guys are like, man, they missed it their first time around.
Yeah.
And they want to like
and that's what you get the grandparent who comes in and now he has the time and oftentimes has a little bit of resources. And so we get to the funniness of the grandparents spoiling the grandchildren because this is they get a reprieve.
Yeah.
And I can see that in terms of just simply the way the life slows down. Because that's what I do hear from guys that I know, like I said a moment ago, is just finding that time. They kind of know this is the hard part for me, and I've told you this before. I don't know if it makes sense. My curse has always been that I know better.
Yeah.
So when you know what you should be doing, or you know the proper way to be, and yet life, and some of it probably selfish, but things are pulling you away from that, that you can't get to that, it tears you apart. And I honestly think that's what eats a lot of guys in that middle age, those guys who are in that danger zone that I talk about, that eats a lot of them alive.
It does. And I think like it's okay for us to challenge men. I think men, they don't need to be demoralized, but they need to be inspired. There's a difference. What culture's doing right now is demoralizing men. You're a piece of garbage. You don't have what it takes. You're this. Men just hear that all the time. We need to inspire men that they can live up to that. You can. You got what it takes. Even if you came from a home that it wasn't modeled to you. It's like someone who grows up in an alcoholic home and everybody says, oh, the trend is they're probably going to be an alcoholic as well. Do you know how many guys I know that grew up in alcoholic homes and because of that they go, I'm going to live my life so intentionally to not be like what my father was. So you can even use negative examples in our lives as inspiration.
So as we approach the end, and I don't want to open a whole new can of worms here, but I hear you talk about this and I agree. With society doing this to men, and it's become this almost comedy of mockery of the male role model in the home, what's the goal in that? And why are we doing that again?
Yeah.
And is anybody drawing any kind of comparison to the fact that stuff's falling apart and you've destroyed this? And I know when you say this, you get demeaned. Traditional role.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the goal there to destroy all that? I've never been able to figure that out.
Well, so here's the thing, real quick. When you look at the very beginning, God exists as a family, Father, Son, and Spirit. Father, Son, Spirit. There's family language. We didn't create that. God expresses himself. God creates humanity in his image. So sons and daughters, moms and dads. Family is part of living out visibly the expression of who God is. We're his offspring, if you will, as creation. Satan wants to just shred that.
Okay.
Satan wants to shred any way that God's image can be reflected in a beautiful way. So society and culture partners with the agenda of Satan to just tear that down. And what better way of doing that than to take men and take them out, or contribute to men being passive, or men being abusive, any of those things. But there's a lot of guys I know right now that really do want to step up, but they're just being demoralized. And men don't need to be somebody in their face yelling at them. They need to be inspired. They need to be encouraged. And they need other men to sometimes even give them the practical tools on how to do that. And I think like if we can move in that direction, then we're going to see, I believe we'll see homes transformed. Mm-hmm. And I think we'll see what God designed for families to display his image and likeness in the world. Because here's the thing, we tell people this all the time. I can't tell you as a pastor that if someone grows up with a horrible dad, that father wound translates in how they see God.
Mm-hmm. An earthly father to heavenly father.
Absolutely. So what better way for Satan to try to put a barrier between us and our heavenly father than a barrier between an earthly father and a child? And so Satan wants to get in there and cut off that relationship. And I think we're seeing that in our culture right now. There's value and there's sin involved. Of course, men for generations have had their own issues we bring to the table, but we're living in a society right now that is trying to, I would say, discredit the role of a father in a home and tearing that down. And so that's the voice I want to kind of counter that and bring truth into that.
And that's one of the big reasons we started trying to do this too. And the truth part of this, and the way you circle it back to truth in the end is what I love about this. And I hope that some of what we're doing and some of the people we have on and some of the stories and experiences you tell are part of that truth, and that can help you with some of those questions and give you some of those tools and help you restart or start
That's it.
or complete your legacy, because nothing's more important. We want to thank you for listening and watching Vertical Pursuit. Once again, we encourage you to go on the website, verticalpursuit.org. We are on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and download the Vertical Pursuit app. Big thank you to Nick Livingston, David Ward, who are handling everything back here for us and along on this ride with us all. We will see you next time. We invite you to subscribe to our podcast, comment, or message us, and check out our website at verticalpursuit.org. Download the VP app and check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.